to our first 5 questions series, our video series where we talk to interesting leaders about childcare through their own expertise. I'm Sarah Rittling, the Executive Director of the First 5 Years Fund, an organization that focuses on building support for federal policies that strengthen childcare and early learning programs so more families can find and afford the quality childcare they need and want. We heard from voters going into this last election that they expected the candidates they voted for to have a plan to address the challenges families face to ensure they have options they want when it comes to finding and affording care. Now that the Trump administration and the Republican-led 119th Congress have been sworn in, we knew we wanted to go back and test these assumptions. Today, I'm joined by Robert Blizzard, who runs the polling firm UpOne Insight. He's a trusted expert in public opinion, and he also conducted our latest poll in the week following President Trump's inauguration. He's going to take us through the findings, including that childcare expenses continue to be a major financial burden on working families. A majority of young voters are putting off having kids, in part due to the high cost, and there are clear policy paths that voters expect Congress and the Trump administration to take. But enough for me. I'll let you hear from the expert himself. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here.
Great. Okay, question 1. I think I'm correct in saying this is your first poll delving into childcare as an issue. Before we get into that, give us a sense of what typically fills your time. Where do you spend the bulk of your time, and where were you in the 2024 election?
Yeah, well, it's certainly been, this is certainly one of the larger national polls I've done on childcare as an issue, but over the years, I've worked in a number of states on the issue indirectly. Many of my public affairs clients with an education focus have increasingly been studying public opinion on early childhood education and the economic realities of childcare for parents. So, look, last year, an election year, obviously most of my work is focused on winning campaigns, right, from the statewide level down to congressional races and local races. Last year I worked in several key states, the presidential race, U.S. Senate, and then I don't know, half a dozen or so competitive congressional seats. But increasingly, many of my public affairs clients who are in the corporate or trade association space are also seeking polling, during an election year to dive deeper into issues or better understand policy platforms on anything ranging from, issues like childcare to education to healthcare, to energy. So it's kind of runs the gamut.
Great. So given that, recognizing you primarily work with Republicans, given the makeup of both bodies, the Congress and the White House, we decided to do an oversample of Republican primary voters. For those of us who don't work in this space, can you tell us why that was so important to do right now and talk about the striking findings you found?
Yeah, sure. We conduct for right after, as you said, the president was inaugurated, we did a national survey, 1,000 registered voters, which is a pretty robust sample size, as well as a national survey among almost 1,000 Republican primary voters. And, look, there's a Republican trifecta in Washington. President Trump firmly in control of the White House and administration, Republicans running both chambers of Congress for at least the next 2 years. So Republicans right now are in a unique position to both, I think, one, set the agenda, but also to enact an agenda. And we're essentially, given a mandate from voters nationally to do so. So I think, look, digging deeper into the attitudes of Republican voters is a really probably smart decision to better understand the public opinion among the Republican base that most folks in both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, as well as the White House, care about, a great deal. And so it's trying to essentially get a learn sentiment among the voters that were most likely to go and have to reelect, right, Republicans who will be running for, the House and Senate again in 2 years.
We, as an organization and certainly as an issue, are fortunate in sharing, this is an issue where there's general agreement across party lines. And given all that you laid out, what fewer what message do you think Democrats should take away from those numbers that you kind of
Well,
lay out?
yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. I'm happy to talk through some of the Republican numbers specifically, but I think, look, the message Democrats can take away from, some incredibly positive numbers here, I think is a couple things. I think number one, there's a willing partner on the other side of the aisle on these issues. Specifically, I'll talk about in a second, the tax credits, tax incentives in particular, especially as we all know, tax policy is going to be an important issue, later this year. And I think, politically speaking, Democrats really struggled with the types of voters in the last election that the Republicans won. And I think Democrats at least should take away a message that a lot of these voters, and I'll talk through kind of the Republican numbers here in a second, these voters are compassionate and they do care about childcare costs, and it's affecting them, right, on a daily basis. And that there's more, I think, common ground on these issues than some, may lead you to believe. So, I mean, if you think about the poll that we did and you look at just the Republican numbers, I mean, unsurprisingly, look, I mean, Republican voters, Republican primary voters could not be more thrilled, about Trump being in office. He has an incredibly high approval rating. They're excited, they're optimistic. But I think when you dig deeper out of just the political realities into this, I think a couple of things. I think number one, Republican primary voters, Republicans, and really all voters overall, there's still a very significant focus on the personal financial situation that folks are facing. Republican parents in particular expressing a lot of concern about the financial situations out there. I mean, we had in our poll a third of Republican parents out there say they're not able to save money or get ahead financially, due to costs, deal with childcare. 28% of Republican voters say that they're struggling to feed their family. A quarter of Republican parents are cutting back on other household essentials to afford childcare. And 1 out of 5 Republican parents agree that they are struggling to pay for childcare costs. And again, that's just Republicans and Republican parents. And those numbers, we see similar data, on the Democratic side as well. There's significant importance placed among Republican primary voters on both the president and Republicans in Congress to have a plan to help working families afford quality childcare for their young children. And I think there's a sentiment shared throughout our polling that demonstrates that Republicans in particular believe it will help. And when we tested, as I said earlier, in some of the tax credits and tax incentives in the survey, when we tested these, I was not surprised necessarily at how high they tested, in terms of positivity and support, but the depth and breadth of support, whether it's increasing tax credits like the child and development tax credit to specifically help parents offset that cost of childcare. I mean, that was at 81% support, with Republicans. The flexible spending accounts, which allow working parents to set aside those pre-tax dollars for childcare expenses, was at 84%. Tax incentives for businesses, as they are trying to help, their employees or provide their own, find and afford quality childcare programs, is at 82%. Even sending money, one thing that this administration seems like they want to do a lot of is send more money back to the states, right? Whether it's through DOE or all these other things. And sending money to the states through block grants so that the states can best decide how to increase access to affordable and quality childcare. And again, let parents have that choice for themselves. That was at 65% support among Republicans. So really, I mean, very strong numbers here across the board, obviously, independent voters and Democrats, but those Republican primary numbers throughout this survey are very high and very strongly supportive of a lot of these issues.
Excellent. And I'm trying to think, you could come work here. You have all the talking points down, and so we'll be sending you to the Hill shortly. Is there any number, like if you had to pick a favorite finding, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there was one number in here that, well, there were a lot of numbers in here that were very intriguing and interesting. There one number that kind of stuck out to me. I mean, when you go through your pollster and you go through a ton of polling, there's a lot of data in a survey, right? You've got just the top line data, and then you can look at, as we did here, among Republican primary voters or Hispanic voters or, independent voters or progressive, whatever. There's lots of different ways to slice and dice it. But one of the data points that really stood out to me was 36%. And that is 36% of parents across the country saying they are not able to save money or get ahead financially due to childcare costs. That's more than a third. That's almost 4 out of 10.
Yeah.
That's not a partisan data point. That's all American parents. So I think why that would resonate too is that's every member of Congress, everybody in the Senate, everybody in the House, they all have parents in their districts, right? I mean, there's parents in every district across the country, whether they're a Republican member of Congress or a Democratic member of Congress. And the fact that more than a third can't really make ends meet or get ahead financially because of childcare costs, that has significant implications for a lot of other things, not just the day-to-day and month-to-month kind of challenges of trying to make the ends meet in your monthly bills. But it also means you're not able to go invest, right? It means you're not able to go and do other things because you're so strapped in, by these childcare costs. And so to me, that was I think we all thought probably it was going to be a pretty decently high number. We all know a parent or have friends that have challenges with childcare costs, but to know that it was at 36% of all parents nationally, that was a pretty striking data point, Sarah.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I'm going to leave us on a cliffhanger.
Okay.
For a future time, hopefully. So we always, joke or whatever about how we always think of the best poll questions after the poll goes into the field. I'm sure
that happens a lot. Yep.
Your reality, right? So after everything that you've learned and digested, and as you've been so generous in talking about the poll over the past couple weeks, anything you've learned about voters' thoughts on childcare? What one thing you would want to put at the top of the list that we ask in a future poll?
Yeah, I mean, this was pretty, as you guys know, this is a pretty comprehensive survey. So that's, it's a difficult one. I think the one thing that may be interesting to get into a little bit, maybe how many extended family members, or what's the percentage of grandparents or other family members that have had to change their lives around to help pitch in on childcare for their own kids, basically, right? Simply because of the cost, and what impact does that have then again on the economy, on the grandparents or extended relatives' ability to have their own businesses or retire or lifestyle changes. I mean, again, we all know someone who has grandparents or aunts or uncles or extended family members pitching in because of the difficulty in affording quality, childcare, especially for a lot of busy working parents. And, even in the DC area with a lot of folks now going back into the office, right, who may not have been working, may have been working from home, they're going to start to get pinched a little bit as well. It's just the economic realities of where we are now. And so I think that quantifying that, I think, would be incredibly interesting. And then, seeing what trade-offs, maybe that's more of a qualitative sense, maybe focus groups or something like that down the road. But I think exploring those conversations would be incredibly interesting down the road.
Yeah, especially married up against that 36% number, because
Yep.
that's just the first layer. So, so I agree, and it sounds like we have more work to do. But for now, that was my 5 questions. And unless you have anything you want to throw back into the mix, I'm really pleased to see you and appreciate all the work we've done together, and eager to see something get done.
Sounds good. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time today, and really interesting data, and hopefully it helps make a difference for sure.